Okay. Yeah, this is not the best angle, but what do I care? As I've mentioned before, my MacBook is truly dead, and I'm thinking of getting a Windows laptop this time. I'm kind of sick of Apple at this point. So, if any of y'all have recommendations, please put them in the comments, or you can email me. But that said, death. So Death and Dickens. Let me see if I can make this. Now this is just going to suck. So Death and Dickens, and obviously Nicholas Nickleby. We had some deaths in Pickwick Papers, and I'm pretending Oliver Twist doesn't exist. That definitely has plenty of death. But we get two deaths in particular in Nicholas Nickleby, and this is the last time I'm going to do spoiler alert for Dickens. Dude's been dead for over 100 years. His novels have been around longer than that. The point of Dickens novels aren't the surprises and who dies and how they die and that kind of thing. I enjoyed these. I reread Dickens over and over, even though I know the whole plot. I know exactly what's going to happen. Okay, so two deaths, and there is a linkage. The first death is that of Smike. This is telegraphed well in advance, and you could say this is the first child death we see, but he's not really a child. He's probably about 19 years old. He's actually supposed to be the same age as Nicholas, I believe, around the same age as Nicholas. So he's not exactly a child, but he wastes away from consumption, that is tuberculosis. He's had a very abusive upbringing, being mainly in Wackford Squares, do the Boys' Hall. And you don't really get an intimation of the consumption of the tuberculosis until, and maybe Dickens didn't intend Smike to die originally, and that's kind of the problem with the early novels. He didn't really think well in advance of where the plot was going to go early on, didn't plan very much. And then it usually solidifies about the second half of the novel, and that's what happens in Nicholas Nickleby. Well, we have this story basically that Smike falls in love with Kate, Nicholas's sister, and, wastes away. But the thing is, that's, not how you die from tuberculosis. Whether or not he loved Kate and this, that, and the other, Smike was going to die anyway. Several people who had money, 19th century, and, treated well and this, that, and the other, again, eventually the tuberculosis is going to kill you. So that was a foregone conclusion. Where Smike dies, it's out in a pastoral area in the countryside where Nicholas and Kate had grown up. You have the tree, you have all sorts of imagery. It's very peaceful. He has a peaceful death. The whole, light at the end of the tunnel, seeing people in heaven, that sort of thing. A happy, peaceful death. And let's contrast that to Ralph Nickleby, who we find out is actually Smike's father, and there's a whole convoluted story and revenge and this, that, and the other. And Ralph, by the way, did not know that Smike was his son, and actually not a bastard. He was married to Smike's mother in a secret marriage, yada yada. But of course, Ralph Nickleby had been hounding Smike and trying to terrorize Smike to get at Nicholas Nickleby as revenge, and he finds out Smike was his son. He finds out Smike was his son right after he finds out Smike had died. And so, as is the wont in Dickens, we end up with Ralph Nickleby dying by suicide up in the attic underneath the trap door that had so terrorized Smike when he was a child, right before he was brought away to do the Boys' Hall. And what's really nice about this, you do get satisfying deaths. Lots of satisfying deaths in Dickens. These are not the most satisfying Dickens deaths. This is a very fitting end to Ralph. All of his hatred, all of his enmity has ended up with just total meaningless. He could have had redemption. And we will see characters with redemption in future novels. Nobody really had redemption in this one. We kind of had a redemption of Jingle and his buddy in Pickwick Papers. But This is not going to be the last suicide in Dickens as well. There is kind of a murder in passing in Nicholas Nickleby. It's just one of the minor characters later, is thought to be rich and his house is burgled and he's murdered. But this is in the wrapping up. And in this one, and again, this is one of the satisfying aspects of Dickens. He at least wraps up all the plot lines by the end of the novel. At this point, you find out basically what happens to everybody. Now, he doesn't necessarily do it all at the end. He got rid of a few of the minor characters along the way. The Crummles family end up in America. The Kenwigses are reconciled to their uncle. All of that. I mean, those are all minor characters. But everybody gets an end, and usually they get what they deserve. What they deserve, not necessarily death, but sometimes it is. And sometimes it's murder. We'll be seeing some of this in the next novel, which I forget what it's going to be for March, but I might have one more video on Nicholas Nickleby, and that will be it before I move on to the March novel. So see y'all.